welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I am, of course, your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 75th episode, our returning guest is Lewis Moore. You first heard Lewis Moore on episode 53 of the podcast. Lewis Moore is an associate professor of history at Grand Valley State University, where he teaches African American history, sports history, and gender history. He graduated with a BA from California State University, Sacramento in 2001, an MA from the University of California, Davis in 2005, and a Ph.D. from the University of California, Davis in 2008. And now on to the show.
Hello?
Hey, Lewis, it's Rob.
Hey, how's it going? I was just going through our emails.
No. Yeah, I have a 3-month-old daughter who needed to have a diaper change, so
Always. I know how it is.
I know you're a father, so I figured you'd understand, but...
Yeah, of course. Today is the first day where they're all in school. So
oh, wow. Congratulations. You made it.
Big accomplishment.
It looked shaky at times. You didn't know if it was going to come out.
Didn't know we were going to make it, but we're here. We had a rough summer, so I think they're a little bit behind on other classes, but they'll catch up. So.
Okay. Cool. Well, how are you settling in yourself with your teaching here this year?
First day, so...
Oh, my gosh.
Just... already behind. So it's like, that's right. Now, I got Tuesdays and Thursdays off. I don't have much scholarship to do right now, so I'm like, all right, I got a lot of prep work on those days. So.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like a lot's changed since the last time we talked, and in some ways, things are very much the same. As far as Colin Kaepernick goes, still doesn't have a job, amazingly. I know we talked about last time, is this a coordinated blackballing kind of blackout situation? But I almost have come to the conclusion that each owner has made that decision on their own, that it's just too much of a whatever they think a risk is or whatever. What's your perspective on it at this point?
Like I said several times, I like to look at it as more of a collusion, like a gentleman's agreement, to assume that they don't talk with each other or know. Like I think, you've been around. I'm sure these billionaires have been around each other for a long enough time. They know, no one's going to make that first move, and it's intentional. So I think they understand that this is a way to silence their players. While at the same time, a number of them are going to act as if they're going to give them the right to speak freely. But this is punishment, right? Businessmen who always talk about not only the bottom line, making money, but winning. And I think Cap could help out some of these poor teams. Right? Yeah. And he would sell, jersey sales too. So, and I think it would make up for, the like I like to call the fake protesters, right? The people they'll be upset for a bit, but they'll get over it. But I just think they're just trying to use him to send a message right now.
Yeah, very much so. That was actually the next thing I was going to mention, is that there was some chatter here in Indiana that, maybe the Colts will pick him up because they need the help. But I haven't seen any movement on that front. And does one team just have to get desperate enough where they give it a chance? Maybe. I mean, you probably know more about the specifics than I do, but there are worse quarterbacks that have jobs right now.
Right, there are worse quarterbacks. I think we're at the point where if it's gonna happen, it can happen, right? He's in their mind. I think the message has been very strong. Like, I don't think another player is gonna step out of line like he did. And you see that, right? You see that with guys like Des Bryant, who are like, look, I got a family to feed. And you see other people, I think somebody from the Tennessee Titans who put their fist in the air last year is like, I'm not doing it this year. I have a family to feed. And so the owners see this as like, okay, this has worked. So I think they're at that point, if they're gonna go through with it. I think the message has been sent. So I don't necessarily see it as something that's going to last forever. But it very could well last forever, right? Because after he's out for a year, then they could always come back and say, well, he's been out for a year. Right? How well is he going to be able to play?
Yeah, speaking of being out and then coming back in, somebody that has followed in his footsteps is one of my favorite players, honestly, Marshawn Lynch. And as a side note, I'm a journalist, and I know other journalists that got mad at him when he would be like, "I'm just here so I won't get fired," and I'm like, that's the most interesting thing you probably heard all day at that press conference. So what are you complaining about? Like, how much have you got to talk about this now? So, like, as somebody looking for a story, there's your story, okay? Like, what's the problem? So, but he's followed in his footsteps, and he has taken that knee, or I think he just sits on the bench, or I'm not exactly sure what he does. But then there's other players too. Like, I saw a pretty sizable huddle at I forget which game. There was all sorts of
Cleveland Browns game.
Yes, exactly. So if they're trying to cap, to use a pun, what these players are doing, then they have failed miserably, because the genie's out of the bottle, and you can't just stop this one guy. It's an idea, it's a movement, it's larger than him. You trying to silence him will only make it stronger, I feel like.
Right, no, and I think it's become two separate movements, right? Cap's movement was national anthem and police brutality protest. This movement is Cap solidarity, and maybe there's some Charlottesville parts to that, right, because it's so fresh, but I haven't really seen much about police brutality, right? Cap was really clear about what he had to say. Mm-hmm. But again, that's the thing with movements. They could grow and they could change and morph into whatever they want. So the guy from the Cleveland Browns, the white individual, right, mm-hmm. 14, I mean, his point was, look, I got to raise my kids, right? And I got to raise kids that don't look like me. And of course, his wife had a brilliant take, like, don't make him the center of this, right? Don't, mm-hmm. In a way, not to say what he didn't do wasn't great, but in a way that black people have to live with this, with their lives. But I think that's the beauty of it, right? That on the one hand, it's not about police brutality, and that's too bad. But on the other hand, it's giving people a voice to mm-hmm. speak out. And I'm not sure if talking about, let's say, racial solidarity and coming together and creating a better America, that's easier on the ears than police brutality. Mm-hmm. So some people are okay with that. But then again, I think there's that Ohio judge, right, and, who was upset about the Browns. And he wrongly noted that they didn't get drafted in the war, even though that hasn't been addressed since 1973, right? His complaint was like, I don't know if he called them draft dodgers, but he said something to that effect. Okay.
Wow.
Just upset. It's just like fake, right? It's like a fake outrage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. Speaking of the police brutality, I mean, that was, like you said, Kaepernick's whole point from the beginning, and in the meantime, we've only seen it proved more right. I mean, his main point has not been disproved. It has only been more proven by Philando Castile, I think, comes to mind very quickly when you think about that. So, I mean, can people just at least admit he had the problem right? And if you want to get a historical perspective, I don't know when he said this, but he talked about the connection to police and slave catchers in history. And I don't think a lot of people understand, why don't, black people trust the police? Well, because they were deputized to, complete this action in this part of history. And he brought that up too, and he connected that all together. So I think, he was right on the main point, and I think that's very important for people to focus on.
Right, no, and I think historically anybody who'd bring up police brutality, no matter what era, would always be right. The struggle is that we don't, as a country, we don't want to admit that.
Yeah, right.
Does it make us, if we're going to admit that for, even during slavery, the black body police, and then after emancipation, it's police by police officers, and it's police brutality, north, south, west, all over the place. And it's a civil rights issue, and it's a civil rights issue that hasn't gone away. To admit that as a nation, you have to admit that democracy hasn't really been promised, and that hasn't gone to everybody, right? And then you have to admit that, okay, well, maybe these people, if democracy hasn't been fairly, right, for everybody, if everybody hasn't had equality or equity, then, well, why are we making such a big stand about these people protesting the national anthem if that's what it represents? So to admit that Cap is right is to admit a lot about ourselves that we, as a nation, have never really done.
Man, that's so true. Yeah. Somebody that has been critical of Kaepernick is Jim Brown. And I think he's an interesting character in history all the way up to now, just given the fact from where he came to where he is now. I believe he's a Trump supporter. Am I wrong about that? I thought he was appearing at some rallies.
He's been to the tower, and he's been one of those people, like, let's give him a chance. He's going to be great for us. And we haven't seen much of that, so...
Yeah, I guess it's him and Kanye and Steve Harvey, I guess, would be the only other people I can think of. But that's a, the thing with Jim Brown is he is a domestic abuser. He's a known domestic abuser. But does that, I saw you had an interesting thing on your Twitter about that. Does that doesn't invalidate, that shouldn't invalidate your point. You're really just doing an ad hominem attack and not dealing with the content of what he's saying. So, he's a mixed, it's a mixed bag with him, I feel like.
Right, no, I think with someone like Jim Brown, like, look, there's one thing we have to admit, and we didn't do this, I wasn't around, but, media didn't do it, and we don't do a good job of now admitting that, domestic violence was a serious issue for him in the 1960s, and what we saw in the late 80s, early 90s, right? That's a serious issue. But I think my thing about that was people were only bringing that up to silence him. Like, this is an issue, domestic violence is an issue that we really have to deal with, not as a prop to silence him so he can't speak out against Cap, but really something that said, look, this is who he is, this is how we are, or as a society, and we need to start treating our athletes like this. Not to say you have nothing worthy to say, but to treat domestic violence as a separate issue that deserves its justice, right? That we need to really talk about this and how it impacts people, and not to treat the victims as if they're not victims. And I think when people did that, it wasn't like they, not to say they didn't care about domestic violence, but it wasn't in a way to really have a conversation about domestic violence. It's only about, you threw that, you got charged at 65, you threw that woman off the balcony at 68, how do you say this is about Cap? But we could do that, right? We could be critical of Jim Brown as a domestic abuser, and we could also be critical of Jim Brown as somebody who perhaps isn't in the right place at this moment to speak ill of Cap's protest because of his politics, and I think we should do that. With Brown, like Brown's, he was critical, in the 60s, he was critical of American society. He was critical of race issues, and he always believed that the way to solve it was green power. I think in Trump, and you might ask, Desire Moore, this is writing a book about him, but I think in Trump he sees just another opportunity to push forth his agenda. This one is more about, American and which is his program, but also, to keep himself in the spotlight. But at the same time, we have to admit what Brown did in the 1960s, minus the domestic violence, and I don't think we should ever take that away from his record. But if we're just talking about his activism, then what he did was bold. What he did was brilliant. At the same time, he is a domestic abuser.
Yeah, I think we have a real problem in the society, or maybe it's just human nature, is that we have trouble seeing these iconic people as complicated, multifaceted people. We want them to be this neat story that we can fit into one box or the other. Are they a hero? Are they a villain? It's like, I think sometimes we get both, depending on which way you're looking at it and which time. And I think, I know Ray Rice also had some things to say about Kaepernick, did he not? So do you give him the same leeway? Or
I don't know. I haven't seen Ray Rice speak out much.
Oh, okay, yeah. He's been pretty quiet, I guess, trying to keep his head down, I guess, for the time being. But, yeah. Why do you think the NFL has such a conservative bent? Is it like the connection to like it being like a war? Is it like, because I don't know, like I feel like if this is the NBA, I heard, I can't remember who I heard say this, but if it was the NBA, it really, I don't see that being as big of a deal somehow.
It's policed by billionaire owners who are conservative. I think most of them are just conservative naturally. And I think part of it, and people are probably working on this story, is that just the culture of football is a little bit different. That kind of very team oriented. Hard work, gonna run through a wall type deal. Coaches like the head general, and I think it has a way of trying to silence people.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that they don't stand out, right, protesting. And I think that's where a lot of the people who've been in football, that's where they're coming out, like those who are against Cap, right? They're so focused on, since an early age, just team. Don't be a distraction. And I think it's just that's the only way they can see things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true. Well, you mentioned Charlottesville before, and I guess there's no way to get around talking about that these days. But I just want your perspective as a historian when you saw that, because if you go back in history when similar things have happened, it's been like Klan rallies, and they're all there. They're scary. They got the torches. They're burning stuff, but their heads are covered. They don't. There's a reason that there's that mask, because there's a consequence, obviously, if people find out you're doing this, socially, economically, whatever. The protesters, if you want to call them that, whatever you want to call those people that turned up for that thing in Charlottesville, they didn't have masks, and they did show their faces, and they didn't seem ashamed of what they were doing or saying. And yes, a lot of them lost their jobs, families disowned them after that. As a historian, what do you think that says when we compare the Klan of old and the scary masks to now just barefaced? That's a big point.
Yeah, they're just emboldened, and I think and the administration does that, right? It's 2017, and there's just this feeling that they don't have to hide their racism, and they can hide their racism behind calls for their heritage, or kind of some kind of sick way of looking at political correctness. But I think it's important just to know that, although we haven't seen them march, right, they've always been there. So I think sometimes we do this, like, say, the KKK. Even in history, we do this. We say, well, here's the first rise of the KKK, and then we'll say, well, the second rise of the KKK, it's, 1915 to the late 1920s, and it's, anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, anti-black. And then you have a second rise of the KKK post-World War II. But I think it should always be noted that a lot of these racist feelings haven't gone away. And they're always just looking for an excuse to bubble up, right, and to come together. And I think Trump becomes this excuse, the protection he gives because he's like them, becomes this excuse to come out and to be who they are, right, and not hide who they are. And I think that's essentially what happens in American history. The difference is now they're just like, we're not going to wear our hoods. And I'm not necessarily sure that a lot of people were wearing the hoods with the White Citizens Council either, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not. So you have your KKK, but the White Citizens Council, these are people out there, right? We're gonna control the government. We're gonna have a White Citizens Council. This is really post-Brown era. Mm-hmm. But these guys are a little bit different, right? They're gonna wear their khakis and their white polos and whatever, and try to act like they're not something. But as Dennis Green said, they are who we thought they are.
Exactly.
Or who we thought we were. Is that how he says it? I think that's how it goes.
Yeah, I think I know the quote. Yeah. But yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, it's not really like, it's kind of silly to split it up like that, era by era, because it's kind of the unhealed wound of our country that is never fully healed, and it was kind of baked into the cake, to mix my metaphors initially, and it's never really been addressed. You can probably speak to this a little better than I can, but it was in South Africa, right, that they had the Truth and Reconciliation Committees?
I'm not sure.
It was some apartheid state where they had come together. Maybe it was Rhodesia. I don't remember. It was some like there had been a break with institutional racism, and then they had this time where people could have faced their accusers and addressed these things in public. And I just feel like that America has never done that in a very fundamental way.
I don't think we are, though.
Yeah. But what do you think the right way to respond to these people in public is? I mean, we saw, this Tina Fey thing where you're supposed to stay home and eat cake and not just ignore them. But then in Boston, it looked like what they did was pretty successful. Obviously, in Berkeley, it was, a little bit more violent possibly, but it still worked, but they didn't stay home. They didn't eat the cake. They didn't ignore the people and not give them the attention. They overwhelmed them with another thing. What is it? Historically, it seems like showing up and making yourself known has been the way to go, I think.
No, I think what it does, the Boston case is a brilliant example. Look, it's mass nonviolent movement, right? Mm-hmm. Intensely that way, and in this day and age, it's going to get the media there, right? And so you're going to have the media there. It's going to be covered all day like it was in Boston, and you're going to see, thousands of people standing up against hate, nonviolently. And when you see that, the optics of that, like, how can you disagree with this? How can you say only a select few people, the president, right, will disagree with it, and he'll look at these people as violent. And that's just part of the history of looking at nonviolent protesters as violence, as troublesome, as outsider, as agitators. He's just using the language of hate and resistance. But most people will see it, right? You do it enough times, they'll come around, and they'll see how beautiful and powerful, like, a nonviolent, integrated protest is.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw this one video from, I think it was from Charlottesville, where this guy, was wearing the, khakis and the, white polo shirt, and then things got very real very suddenly for him, and he ran to the side over where the police were and stripped his clothes off. And this isn't a team. You don't get to just take your uniform off and this game's over. It's it was funny because he just sat behind a keyboard all day every day with posting the Pepe memes, and he was just riding high, and then he tried that in public, and it was a little too the fire was a little too hot for him. So. But
he's that, you're right. He's exactly right. The guy who hides behind, the internet, and then all of a sudden gets called out on it. Physically too. Right. All that racism momentarily stops, but I'm sure right after that he will.
Oh yeah.
That doesn't change. Violence won't change anybody, or a threat of violence not going to change them. They're going to be who they are.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the last time we talked about renaming college campus buildings, from notorious racists to not. And then, of course, with Charlottesville, now the subject seems to be trying to be changed to these Confederate monuments. Now, you had made the point last time, or we had talked about anyway, that, there is, we should contextualize history when we can, and instead of erasing, things, we should put it in a context. I'm thinking of, I went to Indiana University, in one of the main buildings there that was built pre-World War I. It has tiles on it, historical tiles, and they're swastikas, and they've had to put up this sign, and it says, the swastikas were a sign of good luck and peace and throughout history, and then this happened, and we're not taking them down, and they have a historical context. So, of course, people have smashed them with hammers, and some of them remain and some of them don't. But anyway, that's more of that. But I mean, these the thing I think that's been really telling, and researching this, is kind of look at the timeline of when these Confederate monuments went up, and it's always at times where there's a kind of inflection point in history, and civil rights are up for grabs, and they're kind of put as intimidation markers.
No, you're right. The beautiful thing about this society is tons of public libraries, right? And so I think a lot of that information, right, can go there. But if you really want to know about these Southerners, read a book or a documentary. But I think what I like is now cities are starting to be honest with their past. So I was just in Louisville this summer to visit the Muhammad Ali Museum. And a block away from our hotel, there's a marker there of saying this is where a slave auction was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then another block down the street, there's another thing about slavery. So you're getting the sense that Louisville, I think, is also taking down some Confederate monuments coming up.
Mm-hmm.
But you're getting the sense that cities are starting to deal with this, and I think that's what Charlottesville was dealing with too, right?
Mm-hmm.
You really have to be able to tell this history. I would like to see all these Confederate monuments come down, but if they're not, right, if you really want to keep these up and this is something and you truly believe that this is history and this is how we're going to tell history, then you got to tell history.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got to tell what these people did, and if it's violent, if it's vicious, you can't leave that out, because these monuments are up there to create this image of us who we're not, right, and who we haven't been, and you can't erase these things. And I think that's part of the problem, that we want to act as if there wasn't slavery or there wasn't this systematic movement from governments, both local, state, and federal, to get things to as close as slavery as possible. And I think monuments are a way to hide that.
Mm-hmm.
And the discussion of them coming down and the discussion of what they represent is a way for us to talk about that history and hopefully eventually get to a point where we can move forward, right, in a right and equitable direction.
Yeah. The other interesting thing to me has been seeing kind of location of some of these monuments. Obviously, it makes sense for Virginia to have a Confederate monument. If anywhere is going to have one, there's probably going to be some in Virginia. But, I looked it up, and in Indiana, there's 5. And we were I thought we were part of the North. I thought we were part of the Union team. And then Montana, there was a city in Montana, I think it was Helena, that was like, oh, we're taking out our Confederate monument. It's like, hold on a second, you weren't even a state yet. What are you doing with a Confederate monument in the first place?
Right. It's weird. And what kind of information what does that signal to people when it goes up, right? When there's a movement to put them up, right, to raise these funds, to put them on public property, and then when there's a pushback, right, what does it tell people about who you are and who we are? And I think that's why they need to come down, and if say Montana's not going to bring it down, I think they are, but if they didn't want to, then there has to be something there that explains what it means that they wanted that up and they wanted to keep that up, right? And not in a way that they can skirt around racism, but really talk about who they are.
Definitely. And I think they're always in these heroic poses, on top of the horse and stuff. And, that's the type of statue you'd expect to see on the winning side. Like the winners get to put those up, I think. That's usually, I've been to Trafalgar Square in London, that's, that was their team and that was who they put up, and it makes sense. And it's kind of like, this was is there any example anywhere else in the world of this happening? Are we just unique in that? I think we are, but it's
it's just who you're right. It's just who we are and who we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, team mascots are another interesting layer to this, because those have come under fire. We have the Cleveland Indians and the Redskins, and these Native American mascots. There's also some high school and college ones that get even more blatant. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I know I've heard them. People always say when you talk about, well, we should probably change some of these team names, they're like, what's next? The Fighting Irish, and it's like, well, that's kind of a stereotype too. I could see maybe changing that also. But then again, I know people feel very strongly about this, and they have a great personal attachment to these mascots. So what's your take on all that?
Change them.
Change all of them.
No point of having. Yeah, I mean, if someone's telling you they're offensive, then get rid of them. That means that if people don't want to deal with the context of different Catholic denominations or what they're saying about what they're saying about the Irish, then change that too. I mean, to say, well, we should keep the Redskins, or we should keep this and that just because, well, Notre Dame or something silly about the Vikings or something. Let's get rid of them then. If that's the problem, right? Because they don't want to get rid of them. They just don't. They just want to go on and not think about how offensive this stuff is to other people. That's privilege, right? And I know sports seems so small in the context of privilege, but it goes a long way, right? We force people to reconcile with their racism and their privilege and sports and mascots, just as much as monuments, right, can do that.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of fighting Irish, I don't know if he's actually Irish, but did you watch any part or all of the Mayweather-McGregor fight?
I have only seen the 30-second GIF or whatever it is of the TKO.
You didn't get the Ph.D. $100 package?
No, I wasn't. The moment it was announced, I made up my mind I wasn't going to give any of those guys my money. I think I was proven right throughout the fight. But with regard to Floyd, I hadn't, paid to see a Floyd Mayweather fight in a long time. Part of that is just principle. It's like, I don't like this, really who he became. The other part is just the reality that his fights were never really, he was just so good as a fighter. They never really lived up to, to the hype, right? Like, I'm not giving, this guy is an abuser. I'm not going to give this guy $60 to be who he was. But to be clear, this fight is made because McGregor's white, right? And that's why it's able to make that much money. It's able to sell, and that's why people were vested in and really truly believe that he had a shot. There's something to be said. This idea that this guy who boxed for 30 years of his life, maybe even more. A lot, right? Has been in tons of, he's a decorated amateur fighter, and then since the '96 Olympics, he's been one of the top pros. This idea that you could train for 8 weeks and somehow, even though he comes out of retirement in 2 years, that you could somehow, after 8 weeks of training, be that caught up. There's something to that, right? There's something about, I don't think we do that with anybody else, right? Not even Mike. I think even Mike Jordan, we realized that he was going to struggle in baseball. And he did struggle for a whole year.
Yeah, I saw that 30 for 30 about that. That was pretty interesting.
Right, but the two guys, people paid and they got their money.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't really. It reminded me. I think the last time a fight had this kind of cultural penetration was the Pacquiao fight, and that's is that just how boxing is going to be from now on? It's just going to be these big blockbuster fights every 10 months or something. Like, is that? And this one seemed like more of a stunt than any of them I've ever seen. Only because I didn't hear anybody seriously thinking that McGregor was going to win. I mean, this just seemed like, okay, well, one of these people knows how to do this, and the other knows how to do something else, and they're coming over here, and it's it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. At least it seemed to me, and I was totally not shocked when I heard the result. Is that what do you think about the stunt aspect of it? Kind of the cross of the UFC trying to mix audiences and trying to pump things up. I mean, is this a new level, or have we kind of always been here in some way?
I mean, that's what these guys sell. I mean, it's their gladiator sports, and they feed off this, right? These guys are going to be gladiators. They're going to go at it. Boxing, especially Floyd knows how to sell his fights. I mean, he fights every year around Cinco de Mayo and then in September around Independence, Mexican Independence, right? These are big dates in boxing. This year it's going to be Canelo and Alvarez. So Canelo and Triple G. So he had to pick a different date, and it's still sold. From what I understand, there were more people in the Chavez Jr. Alvarez fight in May at that time, around Cinco de Mayo, than there was for the McGregor-Mayweather fight, but that just might be price point. But boxing is, I think, boxing is not dead. It's popular around the world. In America, it's got to compete with a lot of sports. and I think people are starting to realize the pay-per-view model is starting to go away. You can watch fights on HBO and Showtime, but you can also watch fights on ESPN. They have really good fighters this month. Lomachenko, who's one of the top pound-for-pound fighters, and that Bud Crawford. And hopefully, if you're like a boxing purist and you love the sweet science, I'm hoping that ESPN shows more of these guys, right? These guys who will never get the Mayweather money, who will hopefully see that doing basic TV or basic cable will help them out more in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Now, I don't think I've ever asked you this before, but how did you get interested in the first place in boxing? What was your first experience with seeing fights? Did you see fights live when you were growing up, or? Yeah,
I remember my brother and I, we used to watch a lot of fights whenever it was on, or the major fights. Whose house we're going to go to, to go to these fights, and then. And when I was an undergrad, when I had an opportunity to write papers, like to write a major paper, I was able to write a paper about the Jack Johnson-Jim Jeffries fight. It was like one of those long papers, and so that's what got me into believing that I could actually do this, right? I could actually use history and the skills that I gained as a historian to talk about boxing. Right? Mm-hmm. And talk about other sports. Mm-hmm. So that's what I do, and hopefully I get to continue to do that, right? Just sports and history.
Yeah.
Right.
So I may have accidentally purchased a 6-month subscription to newspaperarchives.com because I was trying to sign up for a free trial and I was looking for an obituary. I actually found somewhere that was free later anyway. Oh, so how do I make the most of it while I have it? What process do you use when you're combing through old newspapers? Do you use keywords? Do you look at specific papers and cities? Do you concentrate on time periods? What's your method of attacking a subject?
Man. A lot of what I like to do is microfilm, so I don't have to do any of that.
Oh, really? Okay. So you're actually with the big projector machine and all that?
A lot smaller now, and you can.
Oh, they are? Okay.
And you go through and you read them. But so that's what I like to do. Now, if I was to get stuff that had, when I use databases, just keywords, or it just really depends what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. Fight or fighter, their name. If it's a subject, someone's name with that subject. So check in quotes and in democracy in quotes. Mm-hmm. There's different ways to try to search for political cartoons depending on your database and the search terms. Mm-hmm. But I would recommend if you have it for 6 months, then use it. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes people just get it for you, right? Like what you said, just, oh man, I'm just going to get like 10 articles. And you kind of waste your money, but just like if something pops up, like, I want to know this history, I would just get it. And if you can PDF them, because
right.
you never know when you're going to need them.
Yeah. Well, if you ever need the login information, just hit me up and I'll get you.
Yeah,
I have the hookup until February, and then hopefully I cancel my information. I don't need that auto-renewing. Right. But anyway, you have a lot of books coming out, right? You have a couple coming out right now, don't you?
Right. So Amazon says September 30th. So one's I Fight for a Living, which is about boxing and black manhood from 1880 to 1915, and the other one, We Will Win the Day, which is about the black athlete and the civil rights movement. And that's that one again. That's September 30th. Mm-hmm.
So, is there anything else we didn't talk about that you want to get in there? I appreciate you taking all this time.
Oh, tell everyone to buy my books.
Buy his books, people.
Yeah, they're wonderfully researched. We talked about with the researching a lot of them, just sitting down with the microfilm and getting stuff that people don't have access to or didn't have access to at the time, and and going through them and then really telling the stories through lyrics, right? So whenever I try to write, it's always, you're always going to get, even with the Twitter, right, you're always going to get a lot of primary sources, right? And try to take myself away from that. I'll put context to them, but it's really to step away and to give people an opportunity to see what they normally won't, right? Because I research a lot. So the say, even if I'm doing a fight, like if I wanted to research a fight, especially back in the day, I would just go. A lot of people just go to that day of the fight, the day after the fight. I'd go back like a month, right? Like when are they signing this fight? When are they coming in? But what's also going around with this?
Yeah.
Or for that. Over the boxing book, I wanted to know about LA and sports, so I went and got a newspaper that wasn't online, that you didn't have access to online, the Los Angeles Herald, and I looked through like 6 years every day of the sports section.
Wow!
This before I could PDF it, so I had to be smart of when and what I copied, and I also did that for like the LA Express, so I have like. I think most of the sports section and most of the stuff on boxing in that newspaper from maybe like 1900 to 1903. So that's an everyday newspaper. So that's why I think these books are they're going to be unique because it's the stuff that people have never seen. Right? Same fires, but just different stuff, and just being able to put that into context.
Right. I think, primary sources are very important on that. Now, how do you happen to know about the copyright implications of reproducing those primary sources? Is it like a certain time period as it would have passed, or if the newspaper's defunct, or?
I think there's like 75 years.
Oh, is that it? Okay.
So some of the older stuff, and when I post, some of the stuff I post, a lot of the stuff I post, it's just stuff I've gotten, I PDF it on my own. I'm like, hope I don't get in trouble. There's like a little article here and there.
It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission, I guess.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think it's really important that people see some of the stuff, right? Some of these old that we post. Because then now a lot of times you just don't have access to it. So it's, Twitter gives us an opportunity to provide that access to people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and it's amazing to go back and look at those primary sources because, you have to imagine when the people were seeing this stuff at the time, none of this seemed, this just seemed like what was happening, kind of like how, I'm sure it'll look later to other people in the future about now. So, it's interesting, like once you yank it back into the present, it's kind of like, wow, this is a little like thermometer of the temperature of the time, and people weren't seeing this for what it was at the time, and it's just amazing sometimes to go back and look at those primary sources now and imagine that people thought this was normal. So right. No, if I could do it, I'd do a lot more of it. So hopefully when I get another big break come summertime, I'll get some more stuff PDF and see what I can get out of it. All right. Well, thank you again for taking so much time, and I don't want to take up too much time because I know that you're probably wanting to unwind from your first day here. So, thanks again, and everyone buys books. Seriously, I'm going to do it myself. So, but anyway, I'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
If you enjoy this podcast, there are several ways to support it. I have a Patreon account, which can be found at www.patreon.com/Rob Burgess Show Patreon. I hope you'll consider supporting in any amount. Also, please make sure to comment, follow, like, subscribe, share, rate, and review the podcast everywhere it's available, which includes iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Facebook, Twitter, Internet Archive, TuneIn, and RSS. It really helps. The official website for the podcast is www.therobburgesshow.com. You can find out more about me by visiting my website, www.thisburgess.com. Until next time.